meeting teachers, and by the end of that decade, I was in, oh yeah, now it's time to learn how energy and consciousness works even more profoundly. And so the next decade was the the studying, the mystery studies, the resolving my issues, the balancing, the being conscious, and in that, by the time the end of that decade came about was the starting schools decade, where I started Southwestern College. How to put this into the world as curriculum in terms of how the world sees that, how to keep the spiritual alignment and put it in the context of academia. So that was that decade, the 80s through the 90s, and well, the next decade was just a continuation of that, carrying that further, the 90s to 2000 and all that, and then now we're in this decade, or no, we're actually through that decade, and I guess my next decade, the most recent one, 2000 to 2010, was really reflecting on that, continuing to teach, balance, coming to terms with still teaching and stuff, but coming to terms with the experience up to that point. So then this decade's the Insight University decade, and we'll see where that takes me. Well, another thing that came up in the conversation, the 50s, I was in the teenage in the 50s, so it was a strange time. It was very different. The 50s to the 60s, just something really shifted. But there was something, the 50s has become one of my fond decades. It ended in, was that the way it went? 59? It's right at the end of the 50s, 60s, when I had these deep, first spiritual experiences that really opened it up experientially for me. And we all have those. And so earlier I was saying, well, these decades, what about the decade from being born or being conceived up until when the 60s started? See, right at the end of the 50s, I went into the Army, and I kind of finished that 50s decade, but then the 50s started. See, so I was 9 years old, 9, 10. I kind of matched the decades. So what comes to mind in that, it was really interesting it almost like in retrospect, when I moved back into that, there was kind of a idyllic time. Of course, I had my thoughts and my frustrations and my betrayals, but it was really like the whole thing was getting set up. My dreamier early days, and then in the woods in Missouri, and then coming to California, the city, and dealing with teachers and education, and some of them teach you stuff, and some of them help you activate your karma, and you really learn how school works, and so that set my at odds, being at odds with my education. I loved school, but I didn't like some of the ways that we were in the classroom with each other, and those kind of things. So you start seeing the progression, the foundation of that. So why go back over this and talk about it? Well, one of the things is that when you look at these decades, you look at how scenario works in those plans, and it seemed like one thing at the time, but when I look back, it's really clear to me that there's a progression, that I was in the right place at the right time. Situations came up in my life that needed to be cleared, resolved, balanced. That so that this kind of synchronicity of who I am or what I am. I used to work with like, well, who are you really? Who are you really? And then I lately it's been, well, what am I really? See, not just who am I as a personality or individual, but what is the nature of this being? You know, what kind of creature or consciousness am I? And that somehow that I joined something. See, that I was some kind of expression of some, you know, deep impulse or urge that was part of a play of reality. It was quite amazing to look. Well, what am I? You know, because I kind of got who I am, but what am I? So here we are. We're kind of just right in terms of the epic of things, with the school, with myself, and ready to take it apart a little more. Okay? Drop more of our preconceptions, because this vibration we're calling loving, that seems to be the, you know, the getting down in physics to the, what's the basic particle? See? What's the foundation of creation as we know it? And so they keep breaking things apart to see what's going on with that. And when you crack the smallest particle, what do you have? See? Well, in my experience, there's this little thing going on between loving that's unconditioned and loving that comes in and sparks life. And it's happening continually. In other words, there's something about life that is so present. And when we start to be able to move into that akashic, oceanic experience, and then this question like, well, what am I? Wow. If you're still inside of the reflected universe, you can really misunderstand that. You get delusions of grandeur and because you see this reflected back to you and you think you know what that is and you take it personally. But there's this bigger, to go past that, there's this bigger sense of ourselves where we're this, almost part of something immense and individually aware of that. So, how remarkable. So everybody's like right in there with us. See? And so it becomes clear to me now that the plan has always been at this time, at this place, at this point in history, that a synchronicity would occur in which I begin to understand myself in a way that was part of opening something in opening this greater vibration in the midst of humanity, and that we don't know how that looks. So it was important to get to the place where I had no expectation. I have ideas or visions, but no expectation to exactly how it plays out, the specifics of it. So there's a discovery, like, so vigilant. Oh, I'll know it when I see it. Because I think it's coming about in ways that many of the, perhaps even many of the saints and sages of the ages didn't see it. See, it's what's that saying in the Bible? In the twinkling of an eye. Like it'll all be just like that. It'll shift. Well, that's interesting. Part of what that means to me is that All we know is there's a mystery of loving that's going to be the essence of it. And we don't know how that look. Like we build so many preconceptions. Oh, that's not loving. Oh, that's loving. Not really. We don't know that. The harsh thing could be loving, and the soft thing could be, fearful. So, can we have such a sense of ourselves that we're in the loving, in the presence, and or we'll be able to recognize the opportunity. So we have this world now that's so chaotic, it's complex, it's all mixed up, and so everything's there. So without the ability to see from this, see through the eyes of this loving, we can't discern which choice to make. See, we can only, we don't have that, to whatever subtle degree that is, we'll choose out of the reflection, out of the limitation, out of the contractive pattern. See, because there'll be two things there that look just great. Which do we choose? See, which do we choose? So you have to have that inner perspective. It's not a reactive thing, but it's responsive. So in the responsiveness, we may come forth gently or with force, but it's not preconceived. See, it's not a we're not standing up for ourselves in a way that I'm going to stand my ground. It's not a reactive thing. When you're in your presence and in the loving, there's no issue. You're just immovable. In that sense, you're just that, because the force against you can't find a way in. See, so even when you're processing something or dealing with something or clearing something, that's just hygiene, psychic, spiritual, physical hygiene. You always have to maintain the system, maintain yourself, keep your body healthy, keep your mind cleaned up, keep your field in order and sorted out, and it's a daily practice. So that's just there. Living in the love and light doesn't mean that goes away. It just means that you have the resilience to not lose yourself in the midst of that. And that's the key. So I'm looking forward to our class on the 11th, yeah, Saturday. Saturday, soon, and in the invitation to reflect back over the material, do best you can with that, at least in your own mind, because we've been through a lot, and so it's like a little refresher. Like, so where do you get hold of that without, overwhelming yourself? Well, we just go back over the course as it's sitting there in front of you on Moodle, and look at the elements that we've checked into, and maybe check in on, as you check in on the forums, or remember some of the highlights for yourself. That starts to bring in a harvest where we can start to appreciate what we've come to in ourselves, and appreciate the way we've challenged each other, and even looked at some weeks you participated more fully and some weeks you didn't. So some of the weeks that you were a little shy, and maybe go back and get into a little deeper and say, what were people really working with here? See,